Okay, I want to start today with a weirdly specific vibe check.
A vibe check.
Yeah. You know how in the modern world, it feels like you have to be three different people just to get through the week?
Go on.
Well, you have your science brain, right, for understanding how the universe works, atoms, gravity, all that. Then you have your work brain for spreadsheets, logistics, paying the bills. And then way over in the corner, maybe at 3 a.m., you have your meaning brain for ethics, purpose, spirituality.
And rarely do the three of them ever actually talk to each other.
Exactly. It feels like they're speaking totally different languages.
Yep.
If I try to use meaning brain in a board meeting, I sound crazy.
And if you use science brain at a funeral, you come across as a robot.
Right. But the sources we're looking at today, this whole stack on existential coherence, they argue it wasn't always this way. They describe a state where psychology, ethics, and cosmology weren't separate departments.
They were one single unified story. A high integration society, as the authors put it.
Which, of course, leads to the big question. Where did it go? Why did we lose it?
And we usually have two main suspects that we line up.
Right. Suspect number one, scale.
Right.
We just got too big. You can't have a unified tribe when you have, 8 billion people.
The whole Dunbar's number argument, basically.
Yes, and suspect number two is technology, specifically writing. We stopped telling stories around the fire and we started filing tax returns.
Treated magic for bureaucracy.
Yes. But what makes this deep dive so interesting is that our sources today essentially put those two suspects on trial and find them not guilty.
Which is a pretty bold claim.
It is. Because if it wasn't the fact that we built massive cities and it wasn't the invention of the alphabet, then what actually broke that coherence?
That is the central mystery. And the answer they give, it isn't just about history, it's about neuroscience. It turns out the way a civilization breaks down is eerily similar to how a single human mind breaks down under trauma.
Okay, that is a hook.
Yeah.
But before we get to the trauma part, I want to push back a little on a quitting scale. Because I think most people, myself included, assume that fragmentation is just the price of admission for civilization.
It feels intuitive, right? A village can share a soul. A city needs a spreadsheet.
Yeah. We assume that as populations grow, they have to fragment into these specialized, disconnected boxes just to function.
But the archaeological evidence in our sources just completely upends that assumption.
This part really blew my mind. I'm thinking of the notes on the Lake Superior copper mines.
Yes, this is a fantastic case study. We're talking about the archaic period in North America, so roughly 7,000 to 10,000 years ago.
Oh, wow.
Now, when we think of that time, we think small, isolated hunter-gatherer bands, right? Just scraping by.
Survival mode, purely.
But the physical evidence shows this massive, organized extraction of copper. Not just a little bit. We're talking about tons of material being mined and then traded across huge distances.
Huge distances.
Down to the Ohio Valley, across the Midwest. This required complex logistics, seasonal labor, cooperation between multiple tribes.
Okay, but surely they had some kind of management. You don't move tons of copper without a boss or a contract.
Well, that's the thing. They didn't have a bureaucracy. There's no evidence of a Department of Mining or state-level police forces or written contracts.
So how? How do you get thousands of people to work together without a contract?
Through a ritualized framework. The trade wasn't just economic, it was symbolic. You didn't need a contract because the exchange was embedded in a shared cosmology that everyone understood. The labor was part of the ritual.
So complexity existed before the spreadsheet.
Way before. And if you want an even bigger example, look at Cahokia.
That's the city near modern-day St. Louis, right?
Right. Around 1050 to 1350 CE. At its peak, Cahokia had a population of maybe 10, even 20,000 people. For context, that's bigger than London was at the same time.
That's a real city. But London definitely had a bureaucracy. It had laws, written records, class structures. You're telling me Cahokia didn't.
Cahokia was an urban-scale society, absolutely, but it operated on what the sources call cosmological city planning. The layout of the city, the mounds, the flow of people, it wasn't secular zoning, it was a physical map of their religious beliefs.
The city and the church weren't separate.
They were the same thing. So this idea that we got too big to be whole, it's just historically inaccurate. Scale does not automatically equal fragmentation.
Okay, so scale's off the hook. Let's look at the other suspect. Literacy, writing. There's this romantic idea that the oral tradition was this magical, connected time, and then we wrote it all down and killed the spirit.
It's a very common trope. But our sources introduce a concept that totally flips this. They call literacy a compensatory scaffold.
A compensatory scaffold?
Yeah.
That sounds medical.
It is. Think of it like a prosthetic leg. You don't use a prosthetic because you're a faster runner than everyone else. You use it because your leg is already broken.
Oh, wait a minute. So you're saying writing isn't an upgrade? It's a prosthetic.
That's the argument. We didn't invent writing because we got smarter. We invented it because our internal, holistic, symbolic reasoning was already starting to weaken. We were starting to forget how to hold it all together.
That is a wild idea. So we only write down the rule, do not steal, when people have stopped feeling why stealing breaks the cosmic order.
Precisely. The law is a scar. It marks the place where the organic connection died.
Wow.
Writing stabilizes, meaning that is already fragmenting. It's a scaffold to hold the building up because the foundation is cracking.
Okay, that completely changes how I look at a library. It's not just a collection of knowledge. It's like a massive preservation project for meaning we couldn't hold internally anymore.
And the key thing here is causality. Literacy didn't cause the degradation. The degradation necessitated the literacy.
Okay, so if scale didn't break us and writing was just a Band-Aid on the wound, what caused the wound? What actually breaks this existential coherence?
This is where we get into the core mechanics. And it all comes down to how a system deals with shock. The sources call it the failure of liminal tolerance in the face of rupture.
Okay, let's unpack those terms. Rupture, what's that?
A rupture is a massive shock to the system. A civil war, a plague, a moral collapse. Something that shatters the shared story of who we are.
And that leads to this state the sources call aporia.
Aporia, yeah. It's a Greek term. It basically means no passage. It's that moment of total suspension where the old rules don't work, but the new ones haven't been invented yet.
It's like that moment in the cartoons when Wile E. Coyote runs off the cliff and he's just hovering there before he looks down.
Exactly. It's existential vertigo. And this moment, this liminal interval, is the hinge.
The hinge.
Because from this gap, this aporia, a civilization can go down two very different paths. And which path it takes depends on its liminal bandwidth.
Liminal bandwidth. I love that term. It sounds like internet speed for existential dread.
That's a great analogy, actually. High bandwidth means you can download a lot of uncertainty without crashing the system.
So what happens with low bandwidth? What's path A?
Path A is collapse or contraction. If a system or a person cannot tolerate the ambiguity of that gap, it panics. The anxiety is too high, so it rushes to close the gap as fast as possible.
And how does it close it?
It hardens. It creates binaries. Us versus them, good versus evil. It strips away all the nuance and replaces it with rigid codes and laws.
Because laws feel safe. They're clear. Ambiguity is terrifying.
Exactly. You trade meaning for certainty. You lose the integration, but you stop the anxiety. This is where you see the rise of fundamentalism, hyper-bureaucracy, rigid ideologies.
That sounds incredibly familiar. It feels like every time something goes wrong in the world, the first reaction is we need stricter rules or we need to find the enemy.
It's the low bandwidth response. But there is a path B. The sources call it integration.
And I'm guessing this is the harder path.
Much harder. Path B is what happens if the system can just hold the space. If it can sit in that discomfort long enough to reorganize at a higher, more complex level.
So instead of panicking and making a rule, you tell a new story.
You ritualize it. You narrativize it. You create containers for the aporia, for that in-between space, so you can change without breaking.
This explains so much. It explains why, when things get scary, you see this explosion of black and white thinking. It's a systemic inability to handle the gray area.
It's a defensive contraction. And here's where it gets really fascinating. The sources point out that this isn't just a sociology theory. It's a recursive isomorphism.
Okay, you have to explain that one. Recursive isomorphism.
It's a fancy way of saying the pattern repeats at every level, like a fractal. The structure of a single human brain under stress is identical to the structure of a whole civilization under stress.
Wait. So my personal nervous system does the same thing as the Roman Empire?
In a structural sense, yes. Think about individual trauma. Trauma isn't just that a bad thing happened, it's that the nervous system couldn't process the event. It couldn't metabolize the ambiguity.
So the person freezes up, they get rigid.
They narrow into threat categorization, their ego hardens, they lose nuance, playfulness. Everything becomes a potential threat to be managed.
I need to control my environment to be safe.
Precisely. And a civilization does the same thing. When a culture loses its symbolic architecture, its ability to metabolize reality through story, it mimics that traumatized brain.
It turns to legal codification,
Yeah.
to abstraction.
Yes. It stops trusting the vibe and starts trusting the contract.
That is wild. So bureaucracy is basically a traumatized society trying to control its environment.
That's a very provocative way to put it, but
Tadpole.
structurally, yes. Bureaucracy, hyper-legalism, the obsession with metrics, these
Yeah.
are the coping mechanisms of a culture that has lost its liminal capacity.
It stops trusting the relationship and starts trusting the paperwork.
And the sources list a heavy-hitting squad of thinkers who all point to this same pattern. Victor Turner on liminality, Ilya Prigogine on order from chaos, Gregory Bateson on feedback loops.
They're all describing the same mechanism.
The difference between a system that evolves and a system that calcifies is its ability to tolerate the mess in the middle.
Okay, so we have the mechanism: rupture, panic, contraction. But I want to talk about language specifically. The notes mention this feedback loop that sounds really hard to escape.
It is hard to escape because language is a cognitive technology. It doesn't just describe the world, it shapes how we can describe it.
So if we're in this contracted, rigid, binary state, our language actually changes to match it.
Yes. If the culture's ontology, its basic view of reality contracts, the language creates words and structures to support that. We invent these technical, dry, isolated terms. The sources call it analytic abstraction.
Okay, give me an example. What does an analytic sentence look like compared to a holistic one?
An analytic approach to, say, depression would be, the subject has a serotonin deficiency. We must adjust the neurochemistry. It isolates a variable.
Divide and conquer.
Right. But a holistic symbolic approach, the kind we see in those coherent societies, doesn't isolate. It integrates. It might say something like, the grief in your heart is blocking the flow of the ancestors, which is why the harvest is failing.
Okay, I have to say, to a modern ear, that sounds like superstition.
It sounds unscientific, for sure, but look at the structure. It connects the psychology, the grief, the relationships, the ancestors, and the environment, the harvest, into a single causal chain.
It forces you to look at the whole picture.
Whereas our analytic approach lets you fix the chemical balance without ever asking why the person is sad or how their community is doing. We traded connection for control.
And then we teach that disconnected language to our kids.
And the kids use those terms to think. That's the feedback loop. Distorted ontology leads to linguistic adaptation, which leads to cognitive reinforcement. We literally train our brains to ignore the connections.
This makes the problem feel huge. It's like our whole operating system is designed to keep us fragmented. So what do? We can't just go back to being hunter-gatherers.
No, absolutely not.
Right.
And that's the most crucial point. This is not a return to tradition manifesto. We're not saying burn your phone and go live in a yurt.
Because that would just be another form of contraction, right?
Yeah.
Trying to run away from complexity.
Exactly. That's path A all over again. Technology bad, ritual good is just another rigid binary.
So what's the goal then?
The goal is the non-dual frame. It's path B integration. We have to find a way to hold both. We have the analytic tools, we have the science. We need to recover the holistic context to put them in.
The problem isn't that we have technology. It's that we've let the holistic muscle atrophy.
We've forgotten how to sit in the liminal interval. We've forgotten how to be confused without immediately reaching for a rule book.
So bringing this down to earth for you, listening, because this is heavy stuff. But if the pattern repeats at every level, this applies to Tuesday afternoon, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. Every time you face a personal crisis, a breakup, a job loss, a crisis of faith, you enter that state of aporia. You are in the gap.
The moment where the old story is dead and the new one isn't born yet.
And in that moment, you have the same choice as a civilization. Do you contract? Do you force a quick, simple answer like, all bosses are evil, or I'm just unlovable, just to stop the pain?
That's path A.
Or do you hold the space? Do you have the liminal bandwidth to just sit there in the unknown and wait for a deeper integration to emerge?
That is really hard to do. It sounds excruciating.
It is. It requires immense courage. But the sources suggest this is the missing discipline. We spent centuries building technologies to eliminate uncertainty. We now need to spend some time building the internal architecture to tolerate it.
Existential coherence isn't something you find. It's something you build by enduring the mess.
Exactly. And the most hopeful thing in these sources is the reminder that our brains haven't fundamentally changed. We didn't evolve out of holistic thinking. We just stopped training that muscle.
The hardware's still there.
The hardware is fine. We're just running a very specific, very limiting operating system on it right now. But we can reboot.
I love that. It puts the power back in our hands. It's not about waiting for society to fix the meaning crisis. It's about changing how we process the chaos in our own lives.
And if enough of us do that, well, that's how the recursive isomorphism works in the other direction.
Right. If the individual heals the trauma loop, the civilization eventually follows.
That's the hope.
That is a fantastic place to land. Before we go, is there one final thought from the sources you want to leave everyone with? Something to mull over.
Yes. There is a line that really stuck with me. It addresses that cynical feeling that we can't go back. It says, the claim that we cannot go back to holistic reasoning is cultural, not biological. Our cognitive capacities remain intact. The question is not whether we can integrate, but whether we have the courage to tolerate the ambiguity required to do so.
Courage over certainty. That's the challenge.
That's the deep dive.
Thanks for listening, everyone. We'll see you in the gap.
Take care.